Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I wanted to jump in and participate in a clever little tag from Candy, Soul, and Soil called Dating the Tarot, a tag for decks that didn't make the favorites cut. So Candy started this tag around the end of 2020 when everyone was doing their favorites videos, and she wanted to give a little love to those decks that didn't make the list. I thought this was a great tag. I have been really enjoying watching everybody else's, and I wanted to jump in. I have my notes. I made a list here so that we can go through them all. I did just stick to tarot this time, so I was good. And I think I only have one deck for each prompt, and that's pretty good for me as well. So the first deck is your cheapskate deck. It was the deck that you bought because they were super cheap, and then Candy asked what was the outcome. So I went back through my entire list of decks that I have purchased over since I've been purchasing decks, so for many years. And the cheapest deck that I ever bought was the Cosmic Tarot, which I purchased in 2018, and it was $9 on Amazon. So this was definitely the cheapest deck I have ever bought. I've actually trimmed this one and edged it too. It does come with white borders all the way around, but I took those off and just left the titles at the bottom. This deck is, of course, by far the cheapest deck that I've ever purchased. I think it's the only deck that I've ever purchased that was under $10. Like I said, I bought it on Amazon, and this deck actually fits a couple of different categories for me because it is also the impulse deck that I bought. I just happened upon it one day and thought, ooh, that's cool, and purchased it because it was only $9. So I figured, oh, what the heck? But it also is kind of a deck that I often look at and think maybe I should rehome it because I really don't use it that often. But then I pull it out and I look through it, and it just makes me happy. So I end up always keeping it. So this first deck actually hits quite a few of the categories for me. It is my cheapest deck. It was an impulse purchase, and it's also a deck that I often think about breaking up with, but then I get it out and I'm like, no, I like it. It makes me happy. I love classic movies. I love movies from that era, so maybe that's partially it too. And I do have to say that, like, this deck, this is a AGM deck, and their cardstock is fantastic. And I just love the way this deck shuffles. And that's actually part of it too, is that it just, I don't know, it shuffles like a dream. I love the colors. The illustrations are just beautiful, and they make me smile every time I pull it out. Like, it's making me smile right now. So that is definitely my cheapskate deck, but it's a deck that I do still quite love. I don't use it very often, but it's one that I think will probably always be in my collection because I never break up with it, cheap date or not. So the next deck is the Slow Burner deck, the one you weren't sure about on first meeting, but over time you suspect it's turning to love. And for me, the deck that jumped right to mind for this particular prompt is the Hush Tarot. This is one I've actually talked about a couple of different times on my channel. I don't think it's shown up in a favorites video because I'm still finding my way with this deck. We're still kind of, we're still dating. It's not, we haven't committed. Well, I guess we've sort of committed. I mean, I made a journal. For me, that's a commitment. When I make a journal for a deck, I guess I am committed to it. I'm committed to discovering if it's a relationship that's going to work for me, is I guess where I'm at with this deck. Most of the illustrations I absolutely love. There are a few that missed the mark for me. Sadly, the Queen of Pentacles is one of them. And oh, look, there she is. Ask and you shall receive. It just doesn't really do anything for me. She doesn't feel very pentacle-y to me. But you know, that's okay. But the majority of the artwork I do really love, and where I kind of struggle with this deck a little bit is really in the tarot associations, because it is artwork that was pre-existing artwork that was layered over the top of the tarot, and sometimes that misses the mark for me a little bit. But oh, look at this star card. I love the sort of death and decay nature of this deck. It's very life and death, and I do really appreciate that about it. And doing the deep dive study with it, it's really helped me connect with it, and I'm really enjoying it. It really is turning into kind of a love affair for me. I resisted this deck for a long time. It went on and off my wish list, and I finally decided to go ahead and get it. Here's the backs, which are quite beautiful. But the thing is, this one also fits another couple of categories because it's also a deck that was cheap. It was on sale on Amazon. Unfortunately, I didn't know how much, but I want to say it was like, I don't know, $14 or something like that. It was on sale, and that was why I decided to finally give it a try, because I was figuring like, what the heck, man, it's 14 bucks. I'll try it. If I don't like it, I can always find it a new home. So again, it kind of fits multiple categories too, because it was one that I bought and decided to just give a try because it was cheap, and you know, I figured why not? But then when I started kind of exploring it, I was like, oh, there is some depth here. There is some really cool things going on in these cards, and I really wanted to learn more about it. So I'm doing my whole deep dive study with it. And it's been really fun. It's been very slow going, mostly just because I'm so busy, not because I don't want to work with the deck. It's just trying to find the time for it, right? But this is definitely one that I've really come to appreciate and really am starting to kind of fall in love with. So it's definitely a slow burner deck for me. So the next deck is the Blind Date deck. And this is the deck that you just rushed in and bought without really thinking about it or looking at it too much. And for me, that's the Forager's Daughter Tarot. I saw just like a handful of images and I was like, oh, I need that deck. And it is really beautiful. I love the artwork. It's definitely a deck that makes me slow down because I do have to take some time to kind of sink into these images to really get my messages, to see what's going on. I do have the guidebook that goes along with it. There is a separate bigger guidebook, and I do reference that quite often, but I do find that if I just slow down and take my time with this deck, it will reveal its messages to me. And I really do love the artwork. There's something very sweet and charming about it. But like I said, one of the things that I really like about this deck is the fact that it does make me slow down. A lot of times I have a tendency to kind of rush through my practices because I have so many things that I'm trying to do in a day, right? Like we're all busy. And this is one of those decks that just kind of reminds me to stop for a minute and to slow down and breathe and really kind of sink into these messages. It makes me stop and think. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I really like it. I totally dig this High Priestess. It's a deck that I definitely enjoy working with it. It's gilded, and it's gilded well, which I do actually love. It's got beautiful rose gold gilding. The production quality is lovely. I really enjoy the backs. And it's just one of those decks that, I mean, look at that Emperor. Oh, yeah. It's just one of those decks that I really enjoy working with, but one that I have learned to be very mindful with. Very intentional in my readings, very mindful with my work, and to slow down. But it's definitely a deck that I bought on impulse. There was just something about this deck that said, you need this in your life, even though, that Ten of Swords does break my heart a little bit. But it was totally an impulse purchase. I saw a few images and then clicked order. It was right as soon as the deck went on sale, I think for like, I think it was a Kickstarter first. So I guess I didn't impulse purchase it that much because I didn't back it on Kickstarter. But to be perfectly honest, I don't do that very often, just as a rule. Mostly because I'm impatient and I don't want to wait that long. So when it came out for pre-order, I pretty much just snagged it as soon as I could. And yeah, totally an impulse purchase, but one that I've really enjoyed working with. And it's been a wonderful surprise deck for an impulse purchase. You know, sometimes those impulse purchases don't work out, but this time it did for me, so I'm really glad. So that is my Blind Date Tarot, the Forager's Daughter. So the next prompt is the rebound date, the one you keep going to break up with and keep getting pulled back to. And for me, it's the Mythical Goddess Tarot. And the reason it is my rebound date is because this is the second time I've had this deck. I do have a couple of decks that would probably fit into this category because they are decks that I have let go and then repurchased, but I wouldn't consider any of those decks like a deck that I'm still considering breaking up with. But this little Mythical Goddess, it's another one like the Cosmic Tarot that I think maybe it's time for me to pass it on. I don't use it that often. But to be honest, this one, like I spent so much time modifying this one now. And once I modified it, that really did help. Because I took all the borders off, I, edged it, and it was a whole like thing. I sealed it in Mod Podge. I do have a video on it because like it was a whole experience. And I really do like the artwork in this deck, but I don't use it that often. And I keep thinking like every time I do like a deck clean out, this is one that I always look at. And then I do this and I flip through the cards and I think, yeah, but I really like the artwork. I wish it was bigger and not glossy, and you can see like, it catches all the lights and it's hard to work with like on camera, but for personal readings, I really do enjoy working with it. It's just not one I pull out very often, but it has some beautiful artwork in it. And so it's one that it just like, it keeps coming back. I bought it, I used it a couple times before I trimmed it. I sold it, I bought it again, and then decided to actually trim it and see if that helped, which it did because this had big borders and lots of text around the outside, and doing that definitely helped. But sorry, it's catching all my lights. But it just keeps coming back. And every time I think I'm going to rehome it, I pull it out and I'm like, no, I'm just going to hang on to it because it just keeps coming back up for me. It just keeps pulling me back in. And so I guess that's what makes it my rebound deck. Not only did it come back to me again after I sold it and then repurchased it, it is one that keeps coming, going onto my maybe I should trade it or sell it list, and then I look through it and go, nope, I need to keep it. There's just something special about it that it just needs to be with me. So the next deck is the surprise love affair date, the one you thought that would be just okay on your first meeting, and then it was love. For me, that is the Starchild Tarot, which that whole process actually happened on camera during my walkthrough of this deck. I purchased this deck kind of on, I wouldn't say really on an impulse. Again, a lot of these decks could fit in different categories for me, but it wasn't really an impulse. It was more like Elisa made me do it. And I'm so glad that she did. So glad. As I was doing the walkthrough of this deck, this is one of my favorite cards in the deck. I was like really ho-hum about it. I got it because I have all of Danielle Noel's other decks, and the Starchild was the one that was sort of missing from my collection. And when they did the first edition reprint, Lisa sent me a message and was like, you got to get this deck. And I was like, I don't know. And then I did, and I'm so glad that I did. But as I was doing my walkthrough with it, I was like, I mean, it's pretty, but like there's some things about it that kind of drive me crazy. And, there's just like, this is one, yeah, there are some cards that just don't do it for me. But then, so my whole walkthrough, I was like, it's pretty, I kind of like this, I don't like that, but I was really like ho-hum about it. And then I did my first reading with it, and then I had to turn the camera back on and like film a little bit of a follow-up to add to the original walkthrough, because that is where this deck really made its connection for me. Like just in flipping through it, it doesn't do a whole lot for me, I'll be perfectly honest. Like just flipping through it, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty, but it doesn't do a whole lot for me, right? Like when I flip through the Moonchild, that deck, like that one kind of does stuff for me just on flipping through it. But this deck really doesn't do that. But where it really shines for me is when I actually use it, when I actually work with it and use it in readings. And then it just sings. It's fantastic, which is great because that's what I want. I mean, I don't often just sit here and flip through my decks. What I want is a deck that I can actually, read with, and it's going to work beautifully for me when I read with it. And so this was definitely the surprise love affair, because at first I was like, it's okay. It's okay. And then I did a reading and I'm like, oh my God, I love this deck. So, and it's one that I still am like, oh my God, I love this deck. I'm not wild about the production quality. I know it's beautiful. It is, but it's super thick and heavy and large and difficult to deal with. The gilding's beautiful though. But the cardstock is like ridiculously thick and it's super hard for me to shuffle. I don't care. I love it anyway. I love it and I work with it anyway. So that is definitely my surprise love affair deck, the Starchild first edition reprint. So the next deck is It's Not My Type date. And then I don't know what happened because we really hit it off. And for me, that is the Morgan-Greer Tarot. This one is kind of a little bit cheating because I did actually include this in my favorites video of decks I purchased in 2020, but I kind of had to include it here because it is the one deck that I really that really just spoke to me in terms of I really didn't think this was my kind of deck, that this kind of artwork was really not going to be for me. It's really bold and it's really bright and it's very, very retro. But I freaking love this deck. This deck to me has a very kind of paternal energy to it. I super dig all the mustaches. It reminds me of growing up and all the men in my family, in the 70s and into the 80s, they all had the mustaches. So it really does pull me back kind of to that time, to my childhood. And this is like a deck of old friends. I love working with it. I really love the artwork, and it's so not my normal cup of tea. But oh my goodness, we get along like amazingly well. And so even though it's a little bit cheating because it was in my favorites, I will admit that, was in my favorites, but I had to mention it here because it is the one deck in my collection that I'm like, that's not my deal. That's not my vibe, but totally works for me. It works so well that I recently just purchased this little Morgan-Greer in a tin. I went back and forth about, because do I really need this? I mean, do I need it? No, I really don't. I don't need any of these things, right? As long as I've got one deck that works for me. But I decided this was, again, another one. The tin version was an impulse purchase. It was on Amazon. I was like, I keep seeing the mini version of it. I want it. It's so cute. And I'm like, I love it. I'm going to stick it in my pocket and I'm going to carry it around with me everywhere I go, which, as I mentioned on my Facebook group, is basically, my office, the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, because that's pretty much all I go anymore. But I love it in the tin, and I love the cardstock. And this one it's like so much easier for me to shuffle and work with because it's smaller. Look how cute it is. So yeah. That's it's not my type, but I totally fell in love with it anyway. Totally cheating this one because it was in my favorites for 2020, because it's definitely a favorite purchase of mine for 2020. It was a surprise favorite. I purchased it as part of my sort of exploration on classic RWS decks that I hadn't never gotten around to purchasing for whatever reason. It's like those decks that have been around forever and everybody has, but for some reason I never bought. So I got it just to explore in that little study that I was doing. And oh my goodness, I'm so glad I did, because I absolutely love it. And now it's definitely one of my favorite decks. And I love that I have both versions, because now this little one, I kind of have been carrying it around with me, no lie. So that is definitely not my type date, but totally ended up loving it. And that is the Morgan-Greer Tarot. So the next one is one that I I really lamented about this one. I really went back and forth about whether or not I really even wanted to pull this one into it, because I did want this to be a more lighthearted video, kind of fun. But when it came to the I may have to delete your number, the only deck in my entire collection that really was just like, this is the one that I'm struggling with the most, and that is the Bonestone and Earthflesh Tarot. You can see here, I haven't even taken it out of the box. I mean, I took it out and I looked through it, but and I may get like, you know, I may get tons of hate messages for this, but in just being honest, in my, you know, my tarot that I dated this year, the Bonestone and Earthflesh is one that I am not connecting with. I have feels about this deck. I have feels about all of the stuff that happened around it, and it's just not one that I really feel the need to use. I think the artwork is beautiful. Some of the cards I really love, and they're spot on, and some of them they do miss the mark for me. And I don't know if it's just like the energy that's connected to this deck, or like I'm not sure what it is, you guys. It's just I can tell you this gilding, I was so disappointed to see that they chose to gild it in this red gilding, just in being perfectly honest. And again, I went back and forth about whether or not I was even going to mention this deck, because I have not mentioned it on my channel, because, you know, I don't know. I'm still not really feeling it. I just don't feel called to work with it. But the reason I put it here is because, you know, the prompt was the one that really didn't work, but you still haven't broken up with yet. So it's really not working for me right now, but it's still here. It's still sitting on my shelf. So, I mean, I do quite love that Queen of Pentacles. I mean, she's pretty awesome. So there are things about it that I really like. There are things about it that are a little bit, I don't want to say tainted, but I have feels about it, okay? I'm just going to be honest. I have feels about it. And so I don't know if it's just like I need to wait it out, and eventually I will feel called to work with it. But for right now, it's just sitting on my shelf, and I haven't really felt called to use it. Haven't gotten rid of it. I did actually try once, and it didn't end up working out, and I kind of took that as a sign that maybe it does need to stay with me. So I kept it, and here it sits, but it's the one that, like, it's not working out for me right now. I'm just going to be perfectly honest in that, but it's still here, and maybe someday it will be the right time and place for us to do our work together. But for right now, yeah, it's the one that I might need to lose its number. So that is the Bonestone and Earthflesh Tarot. So the next deck, and you might recognize this bag because it shows up on my channel all the time, is your Forever Love, your True Love deck. And I'm sure it will be no surprise to anybody that it is my Llewellyn Tarot. You guys know how I feel about this deck, right? I don't know why the lights are catching so bad, but I know I've shown this deck like a million times on my channel. I work with it all the time. It's the one that actually just sits right here on my desk, like out in the open all the time. I reach for it daily. It's not one that I often use in like my journals or do super elaborate readings with, unless they're very personal readings, and then I use this deck for that. But a lot of times what this deck really is for me is just my in the moment deck, where I will feel like I need to just pull a few cards or to get a message for the moment. And this is the deck that I almost always turn to. I have multiple copies of this deck in multiple different versions. That's how much I love it. I do have, you know, this one I have trimmed, so it is just down to the borderless. I've edged it. It's very well used because, like I said, this is a daily use for me. If I could only have one deck, this would be the deck, right? I know we always ask that question, like, if you could only have one deck, and everybody's like, oh, I don't know. Nope, for me, this is it. If I could only have one deck, this would be the one that would do it for me, and I would be perfectly content to only have this one deck for the rest of my life. Don't get me wrong, I love all the rest of my decks, but if I could only have one, this would be it. So the next deck is the Stormy On Again, Off Again date, the one that you just can't stay away from even when you don't get along. And for me, that's the Bohemian Gothic Tarot. This deck and we have a little bit of a love-hate relationship. I will admit it, we really do. There are times when this deck just like sings for me. It's beautiful and I have great readings with it and we get along just fine. And then there are other times where it's like, I don't know, we don't want anything to do with each other. We're like, we don't get along. I'm looking at the cards going, you don't look right to me. Or the messages are just like so muddled and not there. But I really do love it. I really enjoy working with it. It's just, we don't always get along. Sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. Sometimes we love and sometimes we fight. So it does have it has awesome cards though. I mean, it makes me smile every time I pull it out. That's like, don't get me wrong, I love it. And every time I pull it out, it does make me smile. But when it comes to actually working with this deck, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So we kind of have a little bit of a love-hate relationship. But I do really enjoy working with it, even when we don't get along. So that is my Stormy On Again, Off Again date, and that is the Bohemian Gothic Tarot. And finally, our last deck is the Friends with Benefit date, who you can run to without commitment whenever you have a need for him, who always just slots right back into your life as if you've never been apart. And for me, that's the Green Witch Tarot. I think I've mentioned it before. I've probably shown it on favorites videos, to be perfectly honest, but this is the deck that feels like coming home to me. It feels like an old friend. No matter how much time has passed, I can pick up this deck and read with it beautifully, and it's just like, we just get along so well. But we're like old friends that, you don't necessarily have to talk for like every day or months or years, and you can still pick right up where you left off. And that's what this deck does for me. I've had it for quite a long time too, so I've done a lot of work with it. But it is one that I don't use all that often anymore, probably because I have so many other decks. But I do really enjoy working with it, and it's just, yeah, it's got that sort of old friend vibe, like coming home. That's really what this deck feels like to me. It's the one that no matter how much time has passed, I can pick it up and I can use it for readings, and I know I'm gonna get wonderful messages from it. And I just, it's a deck that it makes me happy. It makes me feel calm and comforted. I mean, even this Nine of Athmes here, like even the challenging cards are kind of comforting in their own way. Part of that is familiarity with the deck, and the other part of it, I think, is just this enchanting artwork. I really enjoy working with this one. And again, it's like, yeah, it's like coming home. So that is my Friends with Benefit date, the deck that I can always count on, and that is the Green Witch Tarot. So that's a look at all of my decks. We have the Cheapskate deck with the Cosmic Tarot, the Slow Burner deck with the Hush Tarot, the Blind Date deck with the Forager's Daughter, the Rebound date with the Mythical goddesses that keep coming back again and again, the Surprise Love Affair with the Starchild Tarot, the Not My Type with the Morgan-Greer, the I May Have to Delete Your Number with the Bonestone and Earthflesh. Sorry, I am running out of room. My Forever Love deck with the Llewellyn. We have the Stormy On and Off Again with the Bohemian Gothic, and my Friends with Benefits. My deck I can always count on, which also would be the Llewellyn, just, you know, in case you were wondering, but is the Green Witch Tarot. So that is a look at all my Dating the Tarot decks for 2020. I want to thank Candy from Candy, Soul, and Soil for this really fantastic tag. There is a whole playlist, so if you want to see all of the different VRs and responses to this tag, I will leave a link to Candy's playlist in the description box below, because this one's a lot of fun and I've really enjoyed watching a lot of the videos. I haven't had a chance to comment on them all, but I have definitely been making my way through all of them because they have been so much fun to see everybody's tarot dates. So feel free to check that out and let me know if any of these are on your list as well. Thank you for joining me today. You will find links for everything featured here in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.